Pewter has been around for thousands of years, and pewter tankards have been in use for at least many hundreds. For historical reenactors, pewter is quite popular, particularly those reenacting from the late 17th into the early 20th century. And what you see here are three tankards that were around during these particular periods. Now you'll notice there are slightly different styles. Now these are all modern reproductions, so they are made out of safe pewter. Pewter traditionally was made predominantly of tin and some lead. The lead has largely been replaced these days by antimony and copper. This was brought in through force of law from the mid-1970s and into the 1990s. And of course, most of the pewter that you see made in the second half of the 20th century does in fact conform to this much safer standard. However, older pewter is still about, and one of the easiest ways you can spot older pewter is that the older stuff will tend to turn black. So if your pewter is silver in color, that's a good indication it may not be of the older sort. However, these replicate pieces dating back hundreds of years, and we'll start with the first tankard here. And that particular shape, that particular style, relates to the late 17th, early 18th century and was well into use throughout almost the whole of the 18th century. Certainly, if you think of doing anything historically from the period of Queen Anne onwards, that's a good choice of shape. If you get to the late 18th century, into the Georgian period, we start to see this middle one as being the most popular design. And we see a lot of those from the late 18th century into the early 19th century. So, for example, if you're doing anything Georgian, if you're doing something Napoleonic, that would be a good option. Whereas if you were doing Golden Age piracy, this would be a better one. This third one here, this one happens to have a hammer finish, but this third one here on the end, that particular shape, very, very common, but very much Victorian. And you certainly see that style being made well into the 20th century. But really, if you're doing Victorian period or later, that one would be a good choice. One thing I would say is that if you are doing Georgian reenactment, you can have this style or you can have the earlier style. Similarly, if you're doing Victorian reenactment, the Victorian style, perfectly appropriate, but the Georgian and, say, Queen Anne style would also be around because, of course, tankards were in use for hundreds of years, including older tankards. Many pubs would have them and serve their drink in them, and of course, they didn't just throw them away because the style changed. They would, as pieces were newly purchased or replaced, they would be replaced with the more current styles, but they weren't just throwing them away because they were out of fashion. Indeed, we have plenty of tankards of these styles to this day and that are still in use that are original. So I would say we really only see a drop off of originals once people became very concerned about consuming beer and ale from containers that contained lead in them. But if you are doing a later period, you can have an earlier style. But I would say if you're doing, for example, Golden Age piracy, you don't really want to have these styles. If you're doing anything Napoleonic, either of these two will do. If you're doing something later, any one of these styles will do. But if you want to stay true to your period, gravitate to the one that is more common in your period would be my advice. I hope you found that interesting. I know this is a short one today, but if you have any insights, I would love to hear them in the comments. If you enjoyed this, press like, please share, and consider subscribing. Have a good one.